Well, if I can begin to do a little bit of review, recapping of what we've talked about this week, we've been talking about the whole issue of spiritual gifting within the church and remembering that spiritual gifts are empowerments given to us by God. They're graces that are extended to us that are designed to empower and enable us to minister and to serve and address the needs of the church and of the gospel around the world. And we talked about how that there are two primary leadership roles. There are pastors and there are also deacons, those who are called to manage or address the spiritual issues of the church, and those who are called to care for the physical, material aspects of the church. And this is something we might, I've heard some people say, well, the early church didn't have to worry about churches and buildings and things of that nature. And I would say that that's actually not true at all. We find that beginning early in the book of Acts, we find that they're having to deal with the issue of how widows are cared for and that they are meeting together in an organized way on a regular basis. And they're handling funds and the distribution of those funds and all those kind of things. So those material, physical cares of the church are something that's been there since the very beginning. They're not limited just to our modern iteration of Christianity. They were there from the very beginning because we live in a materialistic world. We have a natural world and order of things that we're part of, and we are also dealing with the spiritual world. And that's one of the things that makes Christian distinct, because when we're born again, we are not only made alive spiritually, but we're made more effectively physically in the material world. And so that the gospel is to affect not only people's souls, but even their operations within their world. And so as a consequence of just doing the gospel, we find ourselves doing practical things like Jesus did. He fed the hungry, he healed the multitudes, he cast out demons. And he preached the gospel and he prophesied many things. So we have to understand that we're to live this kind of holistic dynamic of the Christian life, that we are both engaged in heavenly things, but we're also engaged in earthly things. And we shouldn't see one as being holy and the other one being profane, because even things that might otherwise be called the profane or worldly things become holy when they are being directed by the leading of the Holy Spirit who is living within us. And so it has a whole lot of different ways of manifesting itself. And that's where we find later on that when Paul is writing to the Romans or to the Corinthians, he begins to list all these different expressive ways in which the gifts of the Spirit can manifest themselves. In Romans 12, for example, he lists 7 different things. They're kind of these various giftings. He said some are called to prophesying, and I've explained earlier what that means, or what I believe it means. There are some who are just called to serving. There are some people who just, we have people in our church, they just bless me and blow my mind that there are people who will just come and clean toilets and vacuum floors and do all these practical things that make our church a clean and comfortable place to come. They just take care of those details. We have people who collect the money, people who account for the money, who count the money, who distribute the monies, who do all those kinds of things. And I think they're just invaluable people. They manage and organize people in groups and events and situations. Even as I talked about how at the beginning of this week, we're having a prayer time, a prayer focus where we're talking about things that are going on in the world and people and situations that we're praying for, both nationally and internationally and even within our own community. Whew, it took me a long time to say all that, didn't it? But my whole point is that in order to do that, there are people who are going to have to do a lot of work. There are sound lighting technicians, facility people. There are people who just manage people and keep things running and functioning. There are even these essentially vital people who are the baristas in our church. We have 2 coffee bars, and we have a bunch of baristas, and I love them and bless their heart. They keep me filled with my triple Americanos so that I can keep on functioning. But the whole point is, we have these people who are diversely expressing their service to God based upon their different gifting. And part of that is just serving other people in very real, practical ways. And then there are those who do teaching. And we have people who, they may not be pastors, but they're involved in teaching and guiding and directing other people and helping them to grow in the Word. We have people who are encouragers. had this experience of just kind of putting two together. One person who was very grief-stricken and very discouraged, and kind of encouraging the other person to connect with them because they have this amazing gift of encouragement. They always see the upside of everything because they've gone through their own grief and they've survived their own grief. So it's amazing that there are people like that who can just move into those moments where other people are struggling to get through, and when they get done with them, those people feel confident and loved and cared for. They believe that God is still with them, and they move on forward. And then there's something called the gift of giving that Paul lists in Romans 12. And I find that people who have the gift of giving are people who have been given gifts by God. And those gifts usually are financial or material gifts. And it's not always just in money. I know people who have, like, they've had heavy equipment, or they have tools, or they have certain skills that they possess that they are willing to give to other people to help them through difficult times. But there's also people I've known who materialistically, I mean, financially, they just seem to make money without a whole lot of effort. And you know, God didn't wire me to be a businessman, and sometimes my wife wishes I had more of a business sense about me. But the whole point is, there are people who just have that sense about how to acquire and to manage and to handle money in a very efficient and effective way. They're the ones who teach other people how to live on a budget, which, believe me, if you don't know how to do that, you owe it to yourself to have somebody help you put that together, because that will keep you from a lot of grief. There's nothing that will make you more unhappy than being in debt and overspending and causing you to be in debt. Buying things you can't afford. That's a bondage. That's why it says the borrower is the slave of the lender. And that's one of the worst slaveries I see people getting caught up in their life. They are no longer in control. They're working day and night for somebody else. So it's really important that we recognize that there are people who have these gifts, and sometimes it's just in their ability to teach us how to be financially mature and responsible. And then he says, of course, the sixth thing he lists is there are people who have leadership gifts. Not everybody in the church is called to be a leader. And I mean, in one sense, we all are leaders. We're leaders in our homes. Mothers are leaders of their children. Fathers are leaders of their wives and their households. You know, certainly pastors should be leaders of churches, but not all of my pastors are called to lead the old church. So that we have all these different departments with different pastors leading in these different areas. But leadership is something that you can't manufacture. It's either there or not. And leaders are people who are easy to recognize because they have people following them. And there are some people who are just gifted to have people follow them. And so on one hand, you know, as Gail Irwin used to say to the pastors, if you have more than one person listening to you when you teach, that's one more than you deserve, which I think is a very important sense of state of mind to maintain. It's called humility, that the world doesn't owe you an audience. And so if you have an audience, then be mindful that you have a responsibility towards them. And God has called them because he has anointed you to lead them in the teaching of his word or the doing of evangelism and outreach and things of that nature. But it's a gift. It's something that God puts in you. And if you don't feel like you have that leadership gift, if you feel like you are a very gifted follower, the world needs more of those gifted followers, people who recognize who God has put in positions of leadership and support them in the best way they can, as opposed to people who are just very competitively trying to insert themselves into leadership. You know, it's like someone who always tries to interrupt what you're saying because they feel like what they have to say is more important than what you're saying. And that creates a competitive dynamic. And there just needs to be people who understand that their kind of leadership is basically following those who God has chosen to lead. And then lastly, Paul lists in Romans 12, there's those who have the gift of mercy. And mercy is not just simply the ability to feel sorry for other people. Mercy is to be able to respond to people in a benevolent and a caring way. Mercy is this ability not to lose sight of the person because of their personality. You see, I think a lot of people have that problem. They lose sight of the person because they find the personality abrupt or objectionable or rubs them in the wrong way and so forth. They just can't be kind to those people. They just become very abrupt in turn and want to cut them off. And they don't feel bad about it because, well, they were abrupt to me. Well, mercy is the ability to see beyond the exterior and to recognize within every single person there is a light of the divine. I mean, it may be not, I'm not saying they're saved, but what I mean by that is there's a soul inside of them, that person. There's a spiritual essence inside of them that is of immeasurable worth and value. And it's of uncalculable importance to God. And so that when we're dealing with people, we recognize that despite the roughness of the exterior, that God wants me to care for that person in the way that's appropriate. And this is where sometimes people say, well, I just have a mercy gift. No, you don't have a gift of mercy. You just have a vulnerability to be manipulated by other people. Because sometimes the most merciful thing you can say to somebody is no. No. I mean, if I love my kids, my grandkids, my great-grandkids, I'm going to say no to them when they want something that I know is not in their best interest. I'm going to speak truth into their life and say, I don't think that's a good choice. I think you'll regret that decision. Because I think that that's part of the mercy, is that I'm willing to care enough about you to confront you on something that you don't want to deal with. So I think that we have a whole misunderstanding about this idea of mercy, because we look at the person who is merciful as being the person who just gives me what I want and does what I say. And that may be the worst thing in the world. It's like, you know, when an alcoholic wants me to give him money and he says, so I can buy some food. And if you ask him, are you going to buy food or are you going to buy money? How about I buy you a sandwich? No, I don't want a sandwich. I want the money. Then I know that giving them money is not going to address their issue. It's just going to push them further down that road of addiction. So it's that idea that mercy means that I respond to a person in the way that they need to be responded, not just in the way that even makes them happy or gets them off my back or relieves my guilty conscience in some way. But mercy means to care enough about them to confront. Well, there's still more to talk about. We still have to look at 1 Corinthians 12. So we'll pick up next Monday. And I hope this week has been helpful. I look forward to continuing on next Monday. Blessings.